live, Earlene. We're back in the studio with the live studio audience. Thanks for everybody coming in. That was a button, actually. But anyway, hi. Welcome back.
How's it going, Steven?
I am groovy. We've had a week since our last episode.
I know.
We covered a lot of ground last week, and now we're breaking more ground as we lean in this week to a full paper this week.
I know. You know, I tell people all the time in the newspaper business, it's very fluid. You know, we're always covering something. The writers have deadlines. I have deadlines. You have deadlines. And no matter what we do, it always seems like, oh, wait, we got to get this done. There's never, ever a 24-hour period where we feel like, oh, we and you can never get ahead enough of stories, especially when you watch all of the community events unfold that, you know, we're almost up to a full page, it seems like, on the community calendar. And have you seen our sports calendar that we just started?
Yeah,
so
crazy.
This is our second week of our sports calendar. David Minchner is following that, and he's doing a phenomenal job. Yeah. He even has the home games in bold. Yeah. So you don't have to worry about going down through there and reading. I think what is also exciting is the fact that when you look at all those events, we're seeing a lot of activity because of the promotion of those events. We really are.
You start to see a higher turnout at them, and a lot of people, same familiar faces, and people are getting out of the house finally. I think it's finally a sign that the COVID monster is gone, and people just want to go and enjoy their time.
Oh yeah, for sure. And plus, people are enjoying spending time together, and they're saying so. And they're saying, you know what? We learned about this. You guys talked about it on the show, or I saw it on the Facebook, or I saw it on the website, or read it in the paper. So I appreciate the fact that people are paying attention to the news and the activities that we're trying to put out there for them.
Absolutely. Well, we've got some special guests in the studio today, and this is a subject that is near and extremely dear to my heart, as yours as well.
Absolutely.
Why don't you introduce our guest for us today?
I'd be happy. Thank you. This is Michelle Kell. She is the executive director of CASA, which we will explain what the acronym CASA means. Beside Michelle is John House. He's one of the volunteers for the CASA organization. To my left here is Stephen Spohn, who is often my co-host.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, well, which I love when he's on the show, and we're a pretty good team. We work together pretty well. But anyway, we've invited these guys to come so that they can share a little bit about CASA. They had a fundraiser here just a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that I've noticed over and over, I've seen it on Facebook, I've seen it, in print, and I've seen it just visiting with Michelle, is we do not have enough CASA people in Meade County, Kentucky. We have a great need for it, and we need to kind of bump up the action for that.
It's funny you say CASA, and I keep hearing in my head. I have had, they tell us in the military when you separate, you're not going to be able to talk in acronyms your whole life because that's acronym, and then nobody understands us. But CASA has a meaning. CASA is not the word. It's actually an acronym for... And it is the CASA of the Heartland, which is Court-Appointed Special Advocates.
Right.
And it's not necessarily, and of course, this is what we're going to get into on the show, but I will let Michelle explain it for herself.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Stephen said, CASA stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates, and we are court-appointed advocates for children. So our mission is to recruit, train, and then support those community volunteers who are advocating for children who are navigating the court system due to dependency, neglect, or abuse. So a lot of times I think when people hear court advocates, they think, kiddos who are maybe in the court system due to criminal activity, but that is not the case.
These are they still at home?
Sometimes. Oh. So a lot of these kiddos are in foster care or have some type of court petition.
Sure.
They could be, the petition could be against one parent, and so they might be placed in the home of another parent if those parents aren't together, or if there is an option to remove the parent that's unsafe. Sometimes they're in foster homes. They could be in relative placements. We see a lot of children that get placed with like grandma, grandpa, aunts and uncles, things like that. So they're in the court due to no fault of their own because of situations that they've been put in due to the adults in their life that are supposed to be their caregivers. And so our goal is to serve as the extra set of eyes and ears for the courts and the support system for that child and their voice in the courtroom.
Do you guys take the place of an attorney making their John, you've got something to say about that? You guys don't take the place of the attorney or social worker,
No.
or do you work with them?
We work with them. We in conjunction with them.
Yeah.
So
Okay, give me an example of how that would look. Do you just show up and you're like with the child and the legal people that are taking care of them?
I'm pretty much have more time to spend than what a social worker would.
Yeah, that's what I was
Oh,
gonna.
okay.
That's what I
Okay.
was thinking.
So social workers, they might have dozens of cases. I normally, right now, I have 2, but I have a lot more time to spend with them, so I can.
You know,
Pretty much sit there.
when we had our case, it was very difficult, and you could see the gaps between, even because social workers will change out, and then they got this big old case, and we went to one case where the girl switched out, and the other girl took over the case, and she couldn't answer any questions for the judge because the book is this thick and has no history, and she just got handed 20 cases, and it delays the whole process. I could see where you could be of a great value, especially between a guardian ad litem and then for the child. And it was very difficult in our situation because I feel very blessed in our situation because we were involved in the process and helped close the gaps, but they didn't have that where our story happened from. So I'm excited to hear that gap fill because there's so much information that gets lost in translation.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on with CASA is that a lot of times our CASA volunteers are that constant presence. So, if a child gets moved around to several different placements, they might have several different social workers. They might switch therapists, every time they're in a new placement. And a lot of times that CASA volunteer is with them every
Stays the
step
same.
of the
So
way.
even when they're moving.
Yeah.
So have you had
Well,
this?
I had that situation. It was a different family situation, but 3 boys, all with a different biological, same mother, but a different biological father at that point. And there was a point where they kind of started off in Meade County, but was transferred just because of the placement opportunities to Hardin County for a little bit before they got a long-term placement out in Nelson County. Well, during that time, they had changed caseworkers based on where they were.
County.
Yeah, and so, but I was at continuity, able to check in on the young ones and make sure that they saw me once a month. To
Right.
say, oh, this is somebody, and you really develop that trust because. And I'm sure Michelle and John can talk about it. Court for an adult is scary. If you've ever been there and seen some of our, I love them all, but our attorneys, it's scary as an adult
Right. Oh,
to
yeah.
have somebody talking to you. So imagine if
Well,
you're a kid, what that experience could be like if
Right.
you have to be there. And that's why we try to advocate for them. We're the responsible ones that are able to kind of speak a mind on our court report.
And I think that's a tough part in court too, is because the judge only wants to hear the facts, and he kind of parts the water when it comes to emotions and pushes those aside. So you almost have to be methodical about presenting the facts and information so it comes to the conclusion that you want the judge to understand for the child, because these court cases go boom, 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 and I think that's an interesting
And lawyers
part
are
of it.
scared
Yeah.
too. I mean,
Yeah.
the lawyers
Yeah.
are going after a process. They're,
Yes.
they're after
Yeah.
a process for who they were defending.
Well, yeah,
and they, I don't think they're, purposely trying to exploit anything.
No, they
but
have to
that is-
represent
They have
the
to ask
client.
questions that get
Right.
very confusing for
Sure.
that young age, and
Yeah.
we have to paint an image through our reports about what's
Sure.
the kid kind of feeling like through this process. Does he feel safe with where he's at?
Yeah.
Does he want to return? Does he need more time?
Right.
And are there services they might need that they're kind of afraid to ask for?
Oh,
But
yeah.
if they develop that trust for you, hey, I kind of feel like things aren't going well in school, and we're able as advocates to go to the school. We're court appointed to go
Yeah.
into the schools and say, hey, let me talk to the teacher. Let's find out what's going on.
So this CASA, the volunteers that you guys have, give me an example, John, of how effective they are in this kind of situation or any kind of a situation.
Well, I've had a child that's been through 3 removals, and I was there for 2 of them.
Wow.
Both of them, the 2 I was with, were pretty traumatic. So I didn't
Well,
know.
how old was he?
At that time, he was 8.
Okay.
So 8 to 9. And then after he got into his permanent home, and he has been adopted, I am the most consistent thing in his life.
Right.
So I'm as linked to his biological family as well to his new family. He knows that I'm always going to be looking out for the best of him. And he
So
and
you
I-
have a relationship with him.
We have a lifetime relationship.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. So you were there when he was removed? Were you there when he was adopted?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. One of the best days of my life.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, tell us just a little bit about that. I mean, as much as you're able to tell.
To see a young man that you obviously develop a care for, emotions for like that, and you see how horrific it was, and moving forward into a home just full of love and structure, you cannot be more happy if it was your own child. When you see
Sure.
your own child succeed and being safe, and they're safe, they got a home that they know where their food's going to come from. They know they're going to have shoes on their feet and clothes on their backs, and they know that no means no, yes means yes, and
Right.
they have that structure, and you see the grades improve, and you see them carrying themselves so much better, and how they look you in the eye. All that is the success that you're always working toward.
Did it take him a little bit to trust you?
It's funny. I didn't know I was getting through to him. I would volunteer at his school for about a half hour a week, and I didn't get a lot of response from him,
Right.
other than yes and no, and getting answer his questions. Then I found out later that was the highlight of his week was on Wednesday, because
Yeah.
he got to hang out with me.
Oh yeah.
But on his second removal, I asked him if he wanted me to go with him, and I didn't know he cared one way or another. He shook his head yes.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
from that day on, my life
That
has
was it.
changed.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you go in with that mindset of like, I'm here to be the fun uncle, but with a purpose. You want those kids to develop trust, but you also have to have somewhat grown-up conversations with them every
Sure.
once in a while about how things are going in their life, because it's very easy, in adult relationships and child relationships to still, even if it is like domestic violence, to still have that love and that yearning for,
Sure.
and not understand,
Yeah.
well, this is not supposed to be like this, and we're here to really make sure you're safe, because we
Right.
read too many news stories out there across the nation about people in bad situations where they knew they probably should have kind of gotten out of it. Just
Right.
were just kind of entrapped in that. Well, I love them, kind of feeling.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. I know that. Well, actually, I don't know if it's still the case, but I know that for years and years, the goal of the courts was always to try to reunite
Still is. Yeah.
the children with their biological parents. But do they have to go through certain mishaps before they're finally like, you're done?
So typically how that process works is once a child has been removed from their home, the parents are assigned certain criteria that they need to adhere to, and a lot of times it depends on what the circumstance of the case is. If it's if it's something that's neglect, well, how do we educate the parents to where this does not continue to happen and mitigate the situation at home so that way it doesn't continue. If it's maybe it's due to financial insecurities or food insecurities, whatever the situation is. If it's abuse, how do we get the parents the support that they need so that way the child that can be a safe environment for that child.
Right.
However, we do run into sometimes, and a lot of the courts will set like a time frame. Usually it's 14 to 15 months that if a parent has made absolutely no progress on their case plan at all, they haven't started it. It's not just procrastination. It's just they have not made an effort at all. Then that's typically when the courts start looking at a goal change of okay, and sometimes our judges will just straight out ask them. They're like, do you want your children back? Do you feel like you can provide for your children? Sometimes it's we see a lot of instances where there might be single moms who have boyfriends, and it's a boyfriend that's unsafe, and she just can't break those ties. So every situation is a little bit different, but a lot of times it's just the circumstances of the case and the reports that the judges rely on from the social workers, from CASA, information from the child. One thing that I love about the CASA report that we submit is that, we always put our concerns, we put our recommendations, we put the narrative of, what the happenings have been since the last court hearing. But my favorite section that is included in our report is the child's wishes. So that's something that I think is very impactful. And so the judge looks at all of those, components, all that information, and uses that to kind of make that decision of, all right, where are we at? Are we looking at, moving forward and working this case plan? Do we need to look at, especially with our older youth, independent living, if they're getting to the point where, maybe home is not an option for them, let's work on getting them stable where they can take care of themselves. Or if they're younger ones, are they with a relative that can keep them permanently? Or do we need to look at maybe moving towards adoption?
Right. So all three of you have shared, and each one of you have mentioned different things, like there's transportation to go to 3 different counties, there's counseling that's required, that these children have birthdays and Christmas. And how is CASA funded? Who pays for all of these things, the counseling, everything? I mean, does it come from state funds? How does that work?
So a lot of the services that are provided to the child come from the state and the cabinet from the social workers. They facilitate a lot of that for the child. Now, CASA, we are funded through a couple of different things. We're about 46% grant funded, and that is some federal funding, some local foundation grants, and then also we do receive state funding. The state allocates money to the Kentucky CASA network, and then they do pass through grants to the local programs. And a lot of that funding is based on the success of the program. So they're looking at the number of volunteers we have, the number of children that we've served, because, and we want to make sure too, like we know that those are taxpayer dollars that are coming down to us, and we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of those dollars. So
that's right.
So we try to keep things shipshape and happening. And then the rest of our funding is from donations, general donations, fundraising, and then we have like 1% that we categorize as other, which is usually like interest income on if we're able to put money in a certificate of deposit or something like that, where any type of high yield savings, so interest income that comes in gets into that other category. But that is how we're funded. And so when you ask about like services and how we fund some of that, so we do offer mileage reimbursement to our CASA volunteers, because we don't want, these children need someone who's going to serve as a voice for them. And one of our goals at our program is to break down as many barriers as possible for individuals in the community who might want to step up and be an advocate. And so, if you don't have access to a computer, we've got computers at the office that you can check out, just like you can check out a library book. You can come in and work on those computers. If you're going to have to drive, we offer mileage reimbursement, because we don't want being a CASA volunteer to be a financial burden to our community volunteers, because that's definitely not going to encourage people to do it. So we try to break down as many barriers as possible. And then we're also very fortunate that we receive a grant from a private foundation that allows us to provide some just basic need items for our kiddos. So one instance, we had a young lady. She was in her late teens, working towards independence, was going to school part-time and working part-time, decided school was not for her, started working full-time, got an apartment, was really thriving, and then her hours at work got cut. And so she reached out to her CASA volunteer and was like, listen, I can pay my rent, I can pay my bills, but that's going to take everything I have. Like, I was saving up a little bit of money, and really all I need is groceries right now, to buy me some time where I can either find a different full-time job or another part-time job to offset where my hours got cut. And so we were able to, with the funds from that grant, which are very, very specific, they have to be for benefiting either women and or children. And luckily that's all we serve is kiddos. So we were able to do that.
So
I do too.
If somebody is watching this, and so there's going to be a couple of thoughts, like they're watching this and they're hearing these great stories, which they're wonderful.
Yep.
So one, and I'll just ask you the questions all together, and then you guys can take turns answering it. What do you have to do to become a CASA volunteer? Like, for example, what kind of training, what kind of background, things do you look at, that sort of thing? Two, I'm wondering, has any CASA volunteer ever adopted a child out of this program, or if that kind of kicks them out. I know that certain types of foster situations, you go into it, you receive the child knowing that child is off limits, you cannot adopt them. And I'm wondering if CASA has the same situation. And then the third thing is, if someone cannot volunteer to take care of a child, to bring a child, or to have this kind of time, how else can they help? So those are my 3 questions.
So I'll start backwards from your question.
Okay.
So a lot of when I go out there to kind of advocate for the program about being a volunteer, the first people say, well, I'm not ready to foster. And I said, well, it's kind of different because legally the kid cannot come in, any of the kids you're assigned cannot come into your home.
Oh,
Because
okay.
that's people's fear. It's like, well, I got
yeah.
kids of my own at home, I have
I
a
didn't know
family,
that. Yeah.
and I can't. So we always visit where they're at, or in some situations where that might not be a safe environment, they come to like a cabinet office.
So do you
we
go to
arrange
school or their house?
with the school where we arrange with their caseworker. Hey, I have, we need to make a safe place where I can talk in private. But
okay.
they're never you're never allowed to travel with them, put them in your car.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it is very different. And so that's when people tell me, I just don't have time to go on this full time. I said, well, at the bare minimum, which nobody should really kind of enter this program if they're only here to kind of do the bare minimum, but it's an hour visit a month.
Yeah.
To see the
month.
kid. Yeah.
Just once a month?
To check in with the kid or the family that you're assigned to, see how things are going. Now, there's other things you probably want to do, like big events. You want to establish that trust with them.
Right.
So you need to kind of be there. Maybe a ball game you just happen to show up at, or
Do you
back to
have
school.
to let their social worker know if you're going to show up at a ball game?
No, so kind of, and then I'll let her kind of go over the training and the background checks. But the way this kind of works in the court system, and just kind of see Meade County, there's 2 ways that this happens. Either the judge says, I'm looking at this case, I'm reviewing it, and there's a CASA supervisor there that's a paid position for CASA that's there and works with the judge, shows up at our court every Tuesday, and then the judge says, I would like a CASA on there. The supervisor makes a report for that. We'll see what we can do, judge, to get that assigned. Or the CASA team kind of hears a case as they're hearing cases, like, this case could probably really benefit from having a CASA,
Right, okay.
advocate there, a volunteer there for him. And then that supervisor just has to look at that pool of volunteers in Meade County and say, well, we're kind of tapped out. I've kind of been up front and said I can probably do 1 case, maybe 2.
Right.
Anything beyond that, I feel like I'm not dedicating the time to the
it's good
program.
to have boundaries like that.
Yeah,
so.
but I mean, we have a lot of kids in that system every week, coming out of there from situations. So
But what we need is more people, not
Yeah.
the
Right.
people already in there taking on more kids.
right. We
So-
need more people to have those one-on-one
Right.
contacts. Is what we really need.
What kind of background volunteer, what kind of training did you have to go through to be able to do this? Well, first of all, how long have you been doing it?
I'm going into my 10th year,
Wow.
All right.
Yeah.
And then,
and I was sort of pushed into it. Funny story. I really can't go
Lean
into
in.
it.
Lean in.
come on.
But it was the best decision I ever made. I just ran into a friend who's working a booth, and they said, "You either want to be a volunteer?" I go, Judge Addington used to come in, over Pam Addington at her in Hardin County, would come in my store and recruit me, kind of, and I said, "Yeah, I'll think about it." Well, and that went on for several years, and then finally,
You were thinking about it for several years.
several years, and then after I ran into my buddy, that was on Memorial Day weekend. So on that Tuesday, hey, you signed up. I did. I didn't want to tell him. I forgot. So, so I ended up being a volunteer, and that was going on 10 years ago.
Well, and so I can speak to training a little bit because it's probably changed a little bit in the
does.
last
Yes.
decade. So our training process, just kind of the process to become an advocate in general. So the first step is to complete an application, and takes about 20 minutes to complete the application. There's a lot of questions on there, just asking what people's backgrounds are, if they have experience working with children, are they willing to submit to a background check, things like that. But the great thing is that it doesn't matter what your background is. We have, we have advocates that are school teachers, that are retired, that are business owners. So it's kind of all different walks of life and different professions. So there is no one size fits all in terms of what makes a CASA volunteer. But they do have to be at least 21 or older, because anybody under the age of 21 might still be in the foster
they
care
could be in it
system.
themselves, yeah.
So they have to be 21 or older, and really just be able to pass a background check. And when we say pass a background check, like, if you've got something on there from when you were 19 years old or something, and you're in your 40s now, or usually we'll just be like, it's okay, we can move past that. But what we're really looking for is any child abuse or neglect history, any issues with like alcoholism, drug use, things like that, because we want to make sure that these individuals that are working with, that we're entrusting our community's kiddos with, are safe and sound. And then once that application is submitted, we have an awesome staff, and Krista, who is our advocate trainer, she'll reach out to the individual and get them to come in for an interview. And the interview does ask some pretty personal questions, because we always want to make sure that no one has some type of an alternative, ulterior motive or agenda or anything like that.
Yeah.
So we kind of get into the nitty gritty pretty quick. And then from there, she will work with that individual to schedule their training. So whatever fits that individual's schedule. So if you need to do training on your lunch breaks, if you want to do them in the mornings, afternoon, evenings, whatever works for that individual. And what that training looks like is, it is a total of 6 sessions. And the great part is she knocks the first session out after the interview, and it's just general information about CASA. What is the role of a CASA volunteer? And then the next 3 sessions are on Zoom, and it's 5 case studies that the potential advocate will go through, and it starts with, what are some strengths and weaknesses of this family? What do you see that might concern you? Kind of transitions into looking at each case, and you kind of add a little bit as you go with, okay, well, if you're meeting with a kiddo for the first time, how do you ask open-ended questions so that way they're not just, yes, no. and they'll hopefully talk to you a little bit about what's going on, and how do you build a relationship with that child? And then it builds on that until the very last case study is, the last 2 actually we do in person, and typically at our office. But the great thing is, like, I know Krista has met some people at the library to do a training there. So, we'll kind of meet you wherever you're at to make sure that we can help you get done what needs to be done. But the last session, I love it because it really is almost like a simulation of what you might experience as a CASA volunteer.
So it's like a role play?
Yeah, where you have to think about, well, who all's involved in the case? Who might I want to interview as a CASA volunteer or ask questions of? And so you have to think about who do I need information from? And then you ask her, well, can I get, do we have an interview sheet for, for mom or for mom's boyfriend? And then she'll hand those over, and it gives you your information. And then we help the potential advocate craft that into a court report using the exact same template that we submit to our courts, and just kind of give feedback on, well, we can't really say that in a court report, or, you might want to elaborate a little bit more here, some things to think about. And then after that, they get to do a court observation here at the courthouse with Judge Crabessa, Judge Butler, and just observe a couple hours of court to see, what the proceedings are like, kind of put some of those acronyms to use, and learn who's who in the courtroom. And then from there, we do kind of a post-training interview just to see. Some of our advocates prefer to work with older youth, or some of them have past traumas that, they would like to try to avoid if possible. And so, we figure out what kind of case is going to be a good fit for them, assign them to their advocate coordinator, which is going to be like their supervisor, their case manager. That's one of our CASA staff, is their kind of go-to point person on everything, while they're working their case. And then they'll present them with, typically we try to give people a couple of options. And then, we'll go over the kind of the highlights of the case, and they'll pick whichever one they think is going to be the best fit for them, or wherever they feel like they can make the most impact. And then from there, that's their CASA, their advocate coordinator and that CASA kind of take over from there and get them started on that case.
Michelle, I have a question for you.
Yeah, ready to say. I know Stephen has some questions.
So just a couple. The volunteers that are helping do that, by the way, shout out to Nancy Lynn. She says, hi, Michelle.
Yeah,
I'm
she's
a
one. Nancy's a good
volunteer.
worker.
She's in the
Hey,
chat.
Nancy.
Yep.
Nancy.
So
Hi,
she's
Nancy.
watching. Yep. And I wanted to send that shout out. Thanks, Nancy, for the work. She does so much in our community, too. So 2 questions. One is going to be just like, how many volunteers do you need?
Oh, yeah.
Let's throw that number out there and tell everybody this is like, it's not one volunteer, like we need several. What would be
Yes.
an ideal number for this area that you need?
So, well, first of all, it's always evolving. So I'll just kind of looking at our wait list right now. We have, we've kind of steadily had between 10 and 15 kiddos on our wait list just for Meade County.
Okay.
And usually, I mean, we're talking probably between 5 to 10 individuals. So
Okay.
if we could get 5 to 10 people to step up
One caseload.
right now.
One person per caseload.
Yes, then
And-
we could, we could kind of get rid of that wait list, and then if
Sure.
we can just, get a little pipeline,
Sure, yeah.
coming through, then we could avoid having
Can
a
you
wait
do
list
siblings?
altogether.
Like if there's 2 children from the same family, can they have one?
Yes,
CASA?
yes,
Okay,
yeah.
so
So,
that-
so when I say like we have 10 to 15 children, sometimes one case can be one child. We assigned a case last week that had 9 children on one case. We got a husband and wife team that are taking that one together, so you can also
So the 9 children are
advocate.
siblings?
They are, yes.
Wow.
And so they're taking that sibling group and advocating for them. And so that's another thing. If you've got, a best friend, a sister,
Yeah.
a spouse, and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can do this, or, I can build relationships, but I'm not good at paperwork, but my spouse is, then, you can always sign
Yeah.
up and do it together and tag team. So, yeah, that's kind of what that looks like. But right now, if we could get 5 to 10 people who are willing to make that commitment, and I will say we have sworn in, I think, 7 new advocates in Meade County this
Wow.
year,
No,
which
wait a
is
minute, wait.
fantastic.
When you say sworn in.
Oh,
Yes.
Literally?
you got to
yes,
take an
so-
oath.
yeah,
You're
so
going to
when you
swear
go-
before
Okay,
the.
so they get sworn in. Please explain that.
Yes. So when the advocate goes to do their court observation, before that observation starts, at the very beginning, kind of pre-docket happens, our advocates, we prepare an oath for them, and they will go up before the judge and swear their oath to serve as a court-appointed special advocate.
Yeah, I would
So-
assume that there's a lot of ethics to make sure that we're not
yeah.
a conflict of interest and
Yes.
everything else.
We have our own email, that we're
Yeah.
supposed to use. We can't use our personal servers. We have
Yeah.
a CASA
Oh, I was getting ready to
dedicated
ask
thing
that.
because we got to keep
Protection of-
stuff.
yeah.
I don't tell my wife when
Personal
I'm going
private.
to visit or where I'm going on a
Right.
CASA visit, but I'm not like I'm going to
Well, you
so
do
and
that
so's
for
house.
several reasons. I would assume
Yeah.
the child safety,
Yeah, a lot
especially
of
if
it.
it's been removed
and
from
how
the home,
does this
or
affect that,
he, she, not
that
it.
HB 181 bill? Because you're volunteers, right?
Yeah.
So how's that work?
So it has been an interesting process.
Do you know what we're talking about?
Yeah.
So there's a new.
So
there's
you can't if you're a teacher or educator in the school system in the state of Kentucky, the legislation has passed that you cannot communicate with any child that you teach or instruct
or
outside
if
of
you're
the
a
classroom.
volunteer, if
or
you're a volunteer at the school. So I assume that CASA guys are volunteers at the school as well if you meet them there.
So we are, because we are not volunteering
for the school.
for the school
Then
system,
you-
then
okay.
typically just our court order and our case acceptance form are good. But I will use myself as an example because I ran into this. So I have, like I said, I've got a little girl, and I, especially since I transitioned out of teaching, I'm like, it's a little easier for me to go, hop in and volunteer for
Right.
a class party and things like
Sure.
that. So I signed up to be a classroom, volunteer through Hardin County Schools. And so when they rolled out this Senate bill, I was like, oh my gosh, what
I
does this
know.
mean? I'm like, we've got CASA volunteers that are also teachers.
Yeah.
And so, so kind of just every school district has been a little bit different, but we just let all of our CASA advocates know, like, if you're a substitute teacher, if you work for the school system, if you're a bus driver, if you volunteer with children, coach, anything like that.
Right.
Number one, go ahead and get a copy of your court order and your case acceptance letter and put it on file with your employer.
Right.
And then see if your employer needs you to fill something else out. Because, and some of it, like I serve on a case, but the kiddo that I'm working with as a CASA volunteer, he's like in a completely different school district. And when I
Right.
reached out to them, they're like, yeah, we're working on it. We'll let you know when we've
Oh,
got
yeah.
it figured out. And, and then some of our local schools are like, here's the form. It has to be signed by the CASA volunteer and the social worker.
Yeah.
And so we're navigating that, whatever is needed. But at the end of the day, we do
Yeah,
have a
and you're
court
right.
order.
It is different
So-
because, like for us, Stephen and I, the Meade County Messengers, we have 4 school at 5. We have 5 school-age children that work at the newspaper.
Yeah.
So for the 2 of us, there's nothing required from us. But Stephen Spohn,
Whoops.
Because he's a writer,
Yeah.
and a
Schools.
teacher.
he's a writer, and he's also on a writer's thread. And and these youngsters are also on the writer's thread. So the parents have had to fill out that paperwork for him.
And short story too is Dr. Martin and them have gotten ahead of this. When we interviewed them, they've got a pathway. So I would encourage that if any of the schools out there that are supporting you, if they have a problem, get an example or sample, because they seem to have figured it out. in Meade
County schools have been really great. What were you going to say, John?
Well, I'll point out that the CASA staff are fabulous, and whatever I've ever needed, they've always taken care of me.
Right.
If it wasn't for them, I could not do this.
Yeah,
It's
that's good.
phenomenal how much support that you get from the
Wow.
from our office.
Well, I will say this: the enthusiasm, the heart that you guys are showing, the sincerity and your humbleness. I mean, you guys are so humble. You're not like, "Ooh, look at me, I'm Superman." You know, I love what I'm seeing here. This has really been eye-opening for me, and there were so many things I didn't know.
You're going to volunteer, aren't you?
I don't know. I don't know, because I just have so much going on. But that's what everybody says. Oh, look, I'm the editor of the paper. I can't volunteer.
And I'll just kind of add, just to kind of piggyback off what Stephen said earlier, that, once you get on a case, we try to work with people because we know everybody's busy. I work full time, and then I'm always getting myself involved in other things, volunteering.
It gets worse when you retire. I'm just telling you.
I've got a child, and she's in school now, and so just trying to navigate, and then your kid gets sick, and it's always one thing after another. It's life. But so I always tell people, like I said, we really try to break down as many barriers as possible. So we try to keep you on a case where we try to put people on a case where a kiddo is in close proximity to them, where hopefully you're not having to make a lengthy drive, but if if you find yourself in a situation where maybe that kiddo gets moved 2 hours away, by law, we're required to visit them once a month, but we do have paperwork in place and exception forms that if a child is placed, in an unreasonable distance is what we have to decide, then we will try to make accommodations where maybe you visit every other month, and on the off months you do like a FaceTime or Zoom or something like that, where you still have eyes on that kiddo, you're still making contact, still able to talk with them, and then because we're court appointed and we're able to, a lot of the work I think outside of visiting the children is just making some phone calls and sending some emails. And so what I always tell people is usually between 2 and 5 hours a month is really what a lot of our advocates are dedicating in terms of time to serve these kiddos. And 2 to 5 hours a month, half of us spend that much time on social media a day.
Is CASA just in Kentucky, or is it countrywide?
It is all across the U.S. It started in Seattle, Washington, in the late 70s.
How long has it been here in Kentucky?
In Kentucky since 1984. So we just hit our 40th year anniversary, and then CASA of the Heartland has, we've been serving in Hardin County for going on 20 years. And then, of course, we've expanded. And so so Meade County became part of CASA of the Heartland in August of 2024.
So I got. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. No. I wanted to come back around on that, and I don't want, because I know you got a line here going as far as the questions. So when the volunteers spend 2.5 hours a month, how critical and impactful is that in a case? Based on the beginning of the conversation where, caseworkers are overloaded, that 2.5 hours, I would assume, have a huge impact on a judge's decision as far as care.
It's small things. So in my situation, I had a set of boys with one biological father, same biological mother, but because of their case was a little different, they were with dad for a while till dad wasn't able to provide the care. So they got placed in a foster care over here in Meade. The other third sibling in that thing had a different father, same mother, but because his case was different with the paramour of the mother at the time, he got moved to another case. Well, when I got assigned the one kid at first, and so when we developed that trust, we were able to have those conversations. So, well, what do you feel like here, and what do you need, or what do you feel? He said, I miss my brothers. I said, well, we should be able to figure something out. So I worked with my supervisor and said, hey, when we write the next court report, I want to make that in there that, if we're able to get these kids within the same foster family, that would be fantastic for these kids' efficacy and growing up. Yeah. And the judge was able to, and we were able to transfer things around.
Wow.
It did put the onus on me because they did go out to Nelson County with this foster family that was agreeing to take them all in.
And that's the part I think that it gets missed, right? Because you don't have the time, and you're a third party outside looking in. You know what I mean?
For
It's
sure.
I don't think people realize the impact that has on a case. Mom and dad, they're just flipping out because they're in the situation and they're listening to their attorneys, and their attorneys are only speaking to them. It's a very weird process if you're not a lawyer or a judge, or you're involved in the process, right? Because there's so many procedures that have to be filed or completed or task associated. It's like you're building, and no pun intended, but you're building a case either for or against, and it's always the state's plan to try to reunify the parents with the children, but there's only so much the state can do, and there's only so much tolerance, I should say, that's a good word, tolerance, that they can allow for a parent to neglect their children, whether it's either because of abuse, and obviously I have a strong firm, there's probably nobody in this room that doesn't feel the same way I do about abuse,
right?
Whether it's sexual or physical or emotional abuse. But I think that building those pieces or those blocks are critical to the case, because parents will give up if they don't feel like they don't have a chance in sight. And it's not just the kids, you're also trying to work for the parents to say, there's a program for this, why are you struggling? And a lot of times they can't see that blinder. So if that's part of the help, then people need to know why that's there.
Yeah, I cheer for the family to work out the case plan always. I'm never like one like, well, I would always pray for that family to be able to be reunited.
And I think just historically speaking, like with or without CASA, children tend to thrive better when they can stay with family.
Right. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So that's another thing that we have really pushed, that if if a child cannot go back to mom and dad, like, is there a relative that they can go with that where they can still have ties to their family, because the family is so important. And so we're always looking for what is the best avenue, and something that you said that kind of got my wheels turning too is one thing that we always want to make sure that our kiddos know. And one of my favorite stories that one of our CASA volunteers shared is that because our CASAs, our volunteers, like they're not assigned because someone put their name on a sheet of paper and said, hey, here's your caseload. They're not assigned because they're because they're getting paid to be there. That CASA chose to advocate for that child, and they tell them a lot of times, like, and even the parents,
I chose you.
I
chose you.
I'm not here because we're being paid to be here. Like, we're here because we want to be here, and we want what's best for you.
Right.
And so connecting families to resources that maybe they didn't know about, figuring out how to access transportation, things like that. And sometimes, a lot of our social workers really try to help some of those things, but they might have, 15, 20, 30 to 50 cases.
Sure. Yeah. Well, every time something comes out,
exactly.
Social workers will say, I was so overwhelmed. My caseload was so much.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things. One thing is, of course, I would always want reconciliation, for a family. And lots of times parents are doing things that they have been taught to do for generations. And people will say, why can't they just quit drinking for their kids? Or why can't they just, watch their temper for their kids? Well, because they don't know how.
Yeah, that was going to get into the second question I had too.
I love that you're advocating for the family as a whole, because lots of times people just struggle because they just don't know how to make that change. They want to make it. Their heart's there. They love their children, but they don't know how to change.
Yeah.
And then occasionally they'll be like, well, it's just too hard. No, it's not hard. It hurts. It hurts to make those changes, but it's not too hard to make those changes.
Speaking of that, there's this goes into the second question I was going to have. Parents being accountable for their children and the responsibility that they have to raise their children. In Tennessee, they just passed a law that if your child gets in trouble, you're going to get fined $1,000 because you weren't parenting your child. How does that now? I don't think Kentucky has those strict laws, but they're getting a lot of states, and it's been in communication over the last couple of months in the news. They're talking about the days of, would you please stop hitting me? Would you please stop hitting me? Please don't hit me, to the kids versus do that one more time and see what happens. You know what I mean? Yeah. Those were conversations that are being had, but it goes back to the accountability of the child and being available to raise your children and then holding those account. In that same thread, the discussions that came out of the new legislation at the national level for, you can't just sit here and collect a check and then provide for your family. You've got to go at least volunteer 20 hours and do stuff. Have you seen those impacts in our court system and holding parents accountable and the fact that you have a child, you must raise and rear your child, but not at the hand, but with some level of decency in the parenting process?
I think to an extent. We see a lot of, I'll specifically talk about kind of educational neglect, because that's a big one that we see a lot of times with older youth acting out of, they just don't want to go to school. And I think, all of our judges kind of take a different approach, sure. but we have one judge, specifically that sometimes it just depends on each situation. We've been in court where there's been, a mom who's 5'3" and like 115 pounds, and she's got a 6'4", built like a linebacker son that's like, and he's like, I'm not going to school, and she's like, how am I supposed to do this?
Right.
I tried, Judge.
And
exactly,
and so but then we've also got.
Do you go to the Taekwondo class and learn how to take him out at the knees? No, I'm just kidding. But go ahead.
And so
We
I
could
think
do that.
every judge really looks at it as a kind of a case by case situation,
which is good,
basis of
right? Because every case is not a one size fits all.
Right, and I was going to jump in and say that that's such a controversial thing. It's a good point, but it's so controversial because. On one hand, I do agree. Parents should parent, but not if they don't know how.
Yeah, no.
And so, and they should parent because they've had these children and they have a responsibility to raise the children. But that's how we create generational abuse.
Yeah.
So,
But I think what I was trying to get to is I would assume that there's a lot of education that goes into helping the parents learn.
Most of the case plans I've seen for the family has had the first stepping stone, regardless if it was substance abuse or is a parenting class. That's your first. If you can't make it past the first gate of you have an 8-week or whatever it is parenting class and make those sessions. Yeah, we're not even going to tackle the other stuff.
That's a good benchmark for you guys to know where you're at, right?
Yeah, because some just won't even do that. And unfortunately, that is a reality, but they won't even go through that process.
Without you, right, I'm a caseworker. I go before a case, hypothetically, right? And without this second opinion, it's what I would say is, those parents don't care about these kids. They don't even go to work. They don't do anything. And that's the caseworker. Okay, well, the judge hears that over and over and over again. But here's a CASA volunteer who goes in and says, we've actually done education on this, and we noticed that the parent, because it played a role in our case because the parents went through all of these things, but when they heard it from the social worker, because they changed hands so many times, it didn't mean anything. But when the person that was a child, the guardian ad litem, I think is what it was in our case. But imagine if you had the guardian ad litem, a CASA, and they were all on the same sheet of music. Well, like the Holy Trinity just happened. The judge, it's an easier decision because it sounds like in the CASA world, everything is much more personal versus check the block and fill out the paperwork. You're actually trying to get to the relationship for both sides, to your point, unification.
Right.
So that kind of scenario that you just gave, so we had something almost identical to that happen where, we had a dad who was doing a lot for his case plan, but hadn't done parenting class, and there were a lot of things that he hadn't done. And finally, the CASA worker had developed a great relationship with the kiddos, kind of talked to the dad and is like, hey man, I know you want your kids back. What's going on? And finally he couldn't read.
Yeah.
Oh,
you know,
that's, there you
It's
go.
exactly.
And he
And
probably
no one
didn't want to
knew.
say so.
Yeah, and so that was, we were able to be like, okay, well, we need to figure out how to.
Yeah.
So how do we help?
That
how
guy
do we
would have
help
got
a
lost in
parent?
the system if
Yeah.
y'all didn't exist.
Well, you know,
So-
and it's so good that you find that out, because what happens in that type of scenario is people are prideful. They don't want to. They don't want to say,
Yeah.
"I can't read."
the same
and
with
so
drugs
it
and
almost
addiction,
comes
yeah.
off as kind of grumpy and like you don't care or whatever.
Well, and he even said, I'm worried that basically they're going to think that I can't provide for my children because I don't know how to read.
Right.
And so, we were able to get him connected with some adult literacy
Wow. That's a
great
program
story.
and
That
stuff.
is a good
So
story.
one of the things I was going to say a while ago, and it's a little bit. I'm circling back around a little bit, but so where I moved here from Abilene, Texas, in 2019, and there was a program there that was very similar to this, but I don't think it was called CASA, and they had this program called Lunch Buddies. And so what it was is you would sign up to have lunch at the school either once a week or twice a month, like every other week. And that was their contact. And I want to say it was through the Big Brothers and Big Sisters, something like that kind of program. But I thought it was pretty phenomenal. They had a special table and so the person could bring, they go get McDonald's or KFC or whatever and bring it to the kid. What were you going to say? I can tell you were going to say something.
No, I'm just with my kids that I work with. The best connections we have. I meet them someplace for dinner.
Yeah, yeah,
When
exactly.
you
So
sit
you
and
can
break
do
bread
that.
together.
I know you said you
Yes.
couldn't get them in his car
I just
and
can't take them
somewhere.
there.
Oh, but they can meet you there.
Yes.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we've had, so kind of depending on the age of the kiddo, when my kiddo was local, I found he was still placed at home with his family, and I found that I could tell there were things he wanted to share, but he's like, I don't want to say this in front of mom and dad.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, well, let me go get some Chick-fil-A. I'll bring you some Chick-fil-A for lunch. Let's sit down. Let's talk about it. And then,
Then they could talk.
it's easier to open up. And then, we've had a CASA volunteer, especially like elementary schoolers and stuff where they're, allowed to go in and eat lunch with them. And sometimes, usually we'll leave it up to the child of like, do you want us to eat, do you want us to eat in the cafeteria with you? Is there a place in the office, sometimes like a counselor's
Right.
office or something? And we had this is one of my favorite stories. We had a young lady, elementary school aged, and her CASA went to go eat lunch with her. And she's like, no, you can eat with me and my friends. And so she came out there and, we don't ever tell anybody like what capacity we are.
Right.
If the child wants to share, or the family
Right.
wants to share, that's up to
Sure.
them. But
Yeah.
we're bound by confidentiality. And this, the CASA went to meet with the little girl, and one of her friends said, who is that? And she goes, well, that's my CASA. She works for me. And that's one of my
wow.
favorite stories, because that's what our
That's
what our
right.
advocates
We
are
do.
there for, is
for
to
sure.
I love it.
And what a
Yeah.
great confidence for
So-
a child to have. So, wow, this has been. I love it when we have shows and everybody's so enthusiastic that we're almost stepping on each other. Like we're like, da-da-da-da-da-da.
Passion.
Yes, and those are such fun shows.
And that it keeps going, and we're not really dedicated to time like a television show. We can really
Yeah.
have a
Yeah,
good conversation about this.
Right.
This is actually healthy. I honestly don't know what I would have done in my situation if I hadn't have jumped in personally as a family member and gotten involved, because our three children would have been parted out. And I truly believe
Yeah.
that.
Oh yeah. For sure.
Because they were so busy that when we called them, the state, and said, we are viable candidates for those children and we would like to participate in the case. Now, I could have hired a lawyer and done all that stuff, but I didn't know that we needed to do that at the point. We just needed to make sure that they knew, because we had contacted social services, all of that stuff. But in the initial case, they didn't want to deal with it because you have to do the cross state lines process, ICPC process.
Yep.
And I felt like we were just evaded. And honestly, I didn't realize it, but the mom actually has a choice in whether or not they want any additional family, because if they can't find it local, the mom wants to be able to see the kids and work through the plan and stuff. And but when we finally got to the point where we knew that they were planning on trying to extract these kids because they were not making progress, And we received a call and a lot of other information I don't want to get into, but it was not healthy. It was not good. And so we called, and I think the only thing that connected us was when they saw, well, first of all, our profile does not match the rest of that family. It's completely different, right? And so, but we had to earn our credibility with them. Otherwise, I probably would have had to lawyer up. But between the relationship between the guardian ad litem, I almost wish we had a CASA, because that person would have advocated, hey, you're not paying attention. These people around here, and help that case move along. But we drug it through each of those checkpoints, and I can honestly tell you that this program, if you're listening, first of all, it's horrid what the children go through. I think my oldest, and I cry all the time, we talk, and he's gotten so much better. We can have legitimate conversations, and it's not a screaming, shouting match or anything like that. I think every parent gets aggravated to the point there's elevated voices all the time, right? I said, pick that up. What are you doing? But now Landon and I are at the point where we can say, we can have a conversation. Dude, I understand, because you can't as a child, you can't unsee things. You can't unfeel things. You can't undo it. That's why I tell them, no, you're not getting YouTube. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Once you see stuff on YouTube, and YouTube has some very terrible stuff, that's why I tell you what you can watch and what you can't watch. That's why I'm the parent, you're the child. And I said, I realize that there's some things in your life that you can't unsee, but those behaviors that you learned, you're just not allowed to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And we have to work past that. And getting past those conversations and the time it takes, if we would have had a CASA intervention for what y'all provide in this state, where we had dealt with our children, it would have probably made a tremendous impact in the first time that they were taken from the parents, and probably have worked much better. And I can honestly see through some of my friends that are in the foster program and that help do the fostering, and how that relationship has helped them just through having this process for ourselves and our church family with folks that are involved in it as well. Not necessarily the CASA side. And Steve, I've known you for a while, so I don't know where you fit any more volunteer time in, but I am deeply heartened
by location, but
I'm deeply touched by how many times our paths have crossed.
Yeah.
After our retirement, in spaces that you and I just absolutely 100%.
And I've worked with foster parents as a CASA too. They said, I'm having trouble reaching the caseworkers, 40 caseloads, 20 caseloads, whatever. Feel like we need therapy, and I would kind of, have that time to kind of dedicate chasing down that they might not have had because they're raising foster kids,
Yeah, I know, 13,
So I'm like, let me carry this forward for you. Let me see if I can make some phone calls, and boom, okay, appointments next week for some more therapy for such and such. Yeah.
And I think that's something that with CASA volunteers, because you get that one-on-one time or that small group time with that that child or those kiddos, that a lot of times with the foster parents, natural parents, that a lot of times they're willing to share with you that hey, we're seeing some behaviors, we think that we might need to increase therapy, or hey, this kiddo's struggling in school, and luckily we have several former educators on our staff, and so we've helped some of these kiddos get IEPs or 504 plans at school to get accommodations or extra tutoring, extra support that they otherwise might not have had, and have seen them make a turnaround in school and be more successful in school, be more successful at building relationships, be able to join extracurricular activities, things like that, and really just give them a shot at some sense of normalcy, because the situation that they've been.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me just say this, and I'm specifically speaking to Meade-Countyans here. So CASA is a very organized thing. You take an oath. You promise to do this.
Training.
You've got all of this.
Very legit.
Right. You've got all of this background. But when I was a child growing up in Meade County, and I allude to this several times during my editorials or whatever, but I grew up here in the late 60s, early 70s. There were people who CASA'd me without the legalities, without the formality of
You've had people cuss at you? No, I'm just cussing. I'm teasing.
They CASA'd me because they cared about me.
I wanted to clarify.
That's basically what it's about. It's about caring for someone else. You know, there are people that were significant to me becoming who I am. You know, when I was 13 years old, I was removed from my mother's home. And so, that's why when I discuss generational abuse, you know, she did the best she could by the light she had to see by, but her light was very dim, and her light was very hurt because of her raising,
Right.
and because of the person who raised her, because of their raising. So what I see here, and what I love that's happening, is that you guys are not just you're not just benefiting the children that are involved, but you're giving an example to the parents. Because that's the answer. You know, the answer is that the community care about one another, and that and that we go forward with grace and less judgment, and we do more to help each other. So that's what I'm hearing that this program is. And even though now we've got, you know, signatures and we've got checks to do, if we just love each other, if we just step up when we see a problem, if we just handle things as gently and as kindly as possible, but also firm, then we will, you know, I just think things will be better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to add that in before we close out. And I also wanted to see if anybody had any final, like,
No,
30,
you're right. I
45
mean,
second
an advocate
thoughts.
is an advocate at the end of the
Right.
day. Now, there's the legal side of the CASA, you know, the court appointed, so it can
Absolutely.
legally go in there.
Well, my
Because
point is,
it's not
you
even really
should
with
be
the
able
kids.
to become a CASA.
Yeah.
If people were doing it 40 years ago, we could do it now, and it's even better
Yeah.
now.
What we get from the court appointed is not just, you know, we get to sit in a courtroom. It's, we have the authority to go talk to a school teacher that they can't be like, well, you're not going to talk to me. Well, then I go to your supervisor because Judge so-and-so says I
can't.
am going to do everything to take care of this kid, or I'm going to go talk to this
I
therapist.
understand how you
Right.
feel. Others have felt the same way, but this court
I'm not
order
going to lose
says,
on this.
boom,
I'm not going to die on this hill, but I'm going to get the the
Yeah.
information I need because I'm court appointed.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're just a good neighbor, a good citizen, you're kind of legally bound by what the school can share with
Sure.
any kind
Sure,
of
yeah.
personal information.
And the great thing is, though, is that really, I know we kind of asked about like qualifications and requirements. You know, the basic, you know, there's a few housekeeping things. You know, you got to be over 21. You got to be willing to take a background check, submit to the background check, willing to go through training. But the most important one is you just have to have a heart
Have
to
to
help
care. You just have
kiddos,
to
and that's what our staff is there for. Like, we'll help you with the rest of it. It's, you know, but if you've got the heart, you know, we'll take care of the rest.
Well, and personally, I see this. Like, I've worked with Stephen for a number of years. He takes his time. He came in and taught a bunch of kids how to play ukulele.
Somewhat.
I work with John House a couple of times a week. I see the impact he has on these children that come to his class. I mean, they adore him. They can't wait to get there. And even if they're waffling, like, I don't know, I want to go to Taekwondo today. I'm like, Master House is going to be there. Okay, let's get our uniform on. So you know, we are who we are. And there are people out there watching this that they know who they are, and they need to go ahead and call this number.
Appreciate you guys being here.
We are
Thank you
super
so
glad
much.
you guys are
Did
here.
you have something to close out?
Go ahead, John.
One more. A lot of people I've talked to over the years that have been from very humble beginnings, and they've done very well, become very successful. I asked them what changed for them. And a lot of times it's somebody, wasn't necessarily somebody in their family, but somebody that they respected said, you can do better than this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's all what it's taken.
A teacher, an advocate, somebody
But
stepped in
it
there.
was, I had that same experience growing up, single mom, and it was a couple guys came and kicked me in the butt and said, you can finish your Eagle Scout, and I did. And it was those guys that led me, you know, down the road. You're absolutely right, John.
Right.
So just one moment, it's all it takes.
Yeah. And a little bit of volunteer time, and you can call 270-982-2274, and you can actually become a volunteer. Take the classes. It's not asking you to be a foster parent, but at least give 2.5 hours a month and help make a difference in the case of a child's life or a parent's life who's struggling to figure it all out. CASA program, and I just want to thank both of you, Michelle, Stephen, and John, for all the work you do for this program. It's absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Earlene, another great show, another great set of
show.
guests.
I mean, you know, it's just we put out a great product today. Newspaper will be on the shelves tomorrow, in the mail on Thursday. This right here is making a difference in the community. Thank you guys for the opportunity to share this with you guys.
Absolutely.
I think we've talked a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks for
And
having
you can
us.
talk more. Give them a call and sign up for the program. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.